welcome back. True crime, laugh and grind. We know that the old account was hacked, but we're gonna keep the grind, the quote unquote grind. We're gonna keep that going. I do like that. I think it adds a lot of character. So we're gonna hold on to that. So hopefully you guys are doing well. What I wanted to dive into today is the whole thing about right now Amy Bradley. You know, there's a lot of different moving pieces to this. And what I always did and always said was, if we're going to make an assumption, if we're going to draw a conclusion or anything like that, we need to base it on the facts. We need to base it on what we already know. Now, look, a lot of people are going to say, well, we only know one thing. We only know that thing. We only know this thing. We can only base it on what we're being told and what we hear. That's all we can base it on. So what does that mean? The Netflix documentary came out in July 2025. There was Cruise Ship Killers that came out in 2017, maybe 2018. Then there was a Hulu documentary, which was Disappeared. That was the name of the sub show, I guess. And then the title of that sub show was called Troubled Waters. That was season 9, episode 3, if I'm not mistaken. So those are the three main documentaries that came out. Now, there was Unsolved Mysteries back in maybe the late 90s, early 2000s. There was America's Most Wanted as well. I think his name is John Walsh, the one that was doing America's Most Wanted back then. He did a little article on it, and then well, not an article, but he did a snippet on it and got some airtime for that. But what it comes down to truly is, after hearing these different documentaries, these different media outlets, versus what we're being told now by the family, is it different? I don't know if it's different. I think it's additional information. So for now, let's focus on what we know. When I say what we know, it's what we've heard from these documentaries, different documentaries. Because from what we understand, the documentaries have not lied. The documentaries were not wrong. What we have been told by the family is that, when I say the family, it's just one spokesperson. It's her brother, Brad. Is not that they lied about anything, but they left stuff out. They omitted information. So to me, that's not like a lie. And again, they didn't say once that they lied. I'm just saying that, these documentaries didn't lie about anything. They just left out information. So when it comes down to it, it's more like, what did they leave out? How important is the information that they left out? And if we were to go to Cruise Ship Killers, for example, Iva Bradley, which is Amy and Brad Bradley's mom, mentions that when they did a Charlie drill, if you guys aren't familiar with the Charlie drill, it's a top to bottom, complete every inch search. It's usually like an emergency style search, if it is a search, but it's almost like a Mayday signal. So if there's a Charlie drill being spread, what that means is there's some form of danger. It could be physical danger. It could be inclement weather if you're on a ship. It's like calling for Mayday, Mayday, right? It's the same thing. But if you're on a ship and there's a Charlie drill being performed, that means that every inch of that ship needs to be checked, hence the Charlie drill. Well, according to Iva Bradley in the Cruise Ship Killer documentary, she said that the actual captain came and spoke with her and the rest of the family and said, "We've checked for hours. She's not here. She's not on the ship." Okay. We also heard in that documentary that I want to say she said she had a written statement by someone of security, or a verbal. I think she said a written statement. Someone saying that we were only told to check locker rooms, common areas, and bathrooms. That was it. The Netflix documentary doesn't talk about that. The Netflix documentary has the cruise director up there talking about doing a Charlie drill, and he explains the Charlie drill. His name is Dirk Detweiler, and he talks about the Charlie drill. Now, his Charlie drill definition is to a T. It's every nook, every cranny, I think he said every shelf, every closet, top to bottom. To a T is what, he explains and what he describes. Now, here's where things get a little bit messy. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. Here's where things get a little dicey and messy, though. He said it took 45 minutes to an hour. And then he said, well, when you have, 800 people looking and searching, it, doesn't really take as long, which valid. It's a valid statement. But in the cruise ship killer documentary, again, that was just like a one part. I want to say Netflix was a 3-part. But in the cruise ship killer documentary, the captain came out and said to the family, we've checked for several hours and she's not on this bus. Yeah, bus, oh my God, she's not on the ship. So now it's like, okay, did you search for several hours or did you just search for 45 minutes to an hour? Again, this is the information that we have. That is why we're trying to understand this Charlie drill. The Charlie drill is really important because if you're going to check every single inch of that ship, we can now prove, listen, the whole ship has been checked. She's not on the ship. But we were told in one documentary that they checked the entire ship. It took 45 minutes to an hour. And then we found out in an additional documentary 7 years prior that they didn't check every inch of the ship. They only checked common areas, locker rooms, and bathrooms. That's different. That's significantly different. Okay, that happens. Well, if you're going to check every single inch of the ship, how do we know that the areas that you say you searched were searched? Is there a log? We don't have that information. Is there proof that this search occurred? We don't have that information. Now remember, this was 1998. Cameras were much different back then. They weren't in every square inch of the ship. Nowadays, a cruise ship is like a casino floor. There's literally, you see those little round black globes on the ceiling every 7 inches. Like a casino floor. You literally can't look up without seeing 47 cameras. So it's different now. And I exaggerate a little bit, but the point is that every cruise ship has a lot more security now. But how come we don't have the footage of the Charlie drill actually being done? We don't have that. Now, maybe the family has it. The family has an investigator that they're working with. But maybe, again, maybe that's what happened. Maybe they have the footage. But it's not being known for us to look up and verify and confirm. I always live by this phrase, trust and verify. We'll trust you at the very beginning. No questions asked, but I'm going to still verify it just to make sure we're on the same page because you just never know. So I'm going to trust that it was done, but we have no way to verify it. Now, the captain. The captain says, according to Ivor Bradley, again, this is based on what we can only hear and see. We checked for several hours. She's not on this ship. Well, that's a real strong statement to say. We've been checking for several hours. She's not on this ship. She also mentions, this ship, essentially she's quoting the captain, but this ship is moving regardless. Here, there, we're staying on schedule. So you can stay on the ship, no problem, or you can get off. It's completely up to you, but this ship is moving and staying on schedule. Now, let's go into the Netflix documentary. The Netflix documentary says something very similar. However, it's not the captain anymore. It's the cruise director that speaks, Dirk again. And he said, cruises go on. Life goes on. Like pretty much business as usual. It's essentially saying the same thing, the captain's saying. I mean, it does seem a little callous, but whatever. I mean, there's a very good chance this guy just doesn't want to talk about it anymore just because he's been hearing about it for so many years. And he's like, why you guys keep looking at me? Like, I can understand frustration. Like, I get that. But he didn't really say much different from what the captain said in the Cruise Ship Killer documentary. He just said, cruises go on. He makes another statement too, which was a little bit out of whack personally, but he said, and again, it's roughly something like this in the Netflix documentary, but he says one family's unfortunate accident or incident or one unfortunate accident for a family shouldn't ruin 2,400 other people's vacations or a whole ship's vacation, something along those lines. And at first I'm like, yeah, that's kind of rough to say. Like, if that was your daughter, you probably wouldn't say that. But we also have to remember, where is he coming from? Like, mentally, where is he coming from? He's coming from a fact of like, hey, look, I got to follow policy and procedure. we checked the whole ship. She's not on this ship. So we got to stay on schedule, or else we're going to have to refund all these people's money and maybe have lawsuits and stuff. Like there's a lot of corporate things behind his response. I'm not making an excuse for the guy, but there's a very good chance that that's exactly how it was. He's not going to be like, listen, I got to stop this whole ship to look for one person. He's probably not going to do that. Morally and ethically, you'd be like, yeah, do it. But like financially, it's not going to happen. For his job being on the line, it's not going to happen. There's probably other things, guys, too, that's in place. Like, hey, if somebody goes missing, and again, I'm just speculating right now. If somebody goes missing and you have not checked the whole ship, like it might say, look, you are cleared to go. Once you've performed the Charlie drill and you've searched the entire ship, you all confirm that it's been searched and that passenger's not there. You've checked everywhere, then you are free to continue on because that passenger either went overboard or is on the island somewhere, depending on where they are. So, and again, guys, when people go overboard in 1998, they didn't have those sirens like they have now. It's much different now. So there's a very good chance that they were like, listen, we searched this whole place. She's not here. She is not here. So I can understand where he's coming from. I don't have to like how he went about it, but I can understand where he's coming from there. Now, that's what we heard in the Netflix documentary. That's what we heard in the cruise ship killer documentary. And it could have been also been in the Hulu documentary, Disappeared, Troubled Waters. It's all over. Here's another big thing that some of the documentaries left out is they mentioned that, when I say they, I mean the family mentioned that Brad's dad, Ron, came down to the disco, or maybe up to the disco, around 3 o'clock in the morning. And I've done a couple of videos on this. But the reason that's important is because all we heard when we watched the Netflix documentary, and including the other ones that I've mentioned on Hulu and then the cruise ship killer one, I don't know what station that's on. But we also heard on those that Ron woke up at like 5:30 in the morning, roughly 5:30, saw Amy's legs and feet, was like, all right, she's safe. And we're like, what do you mean she's safe? Like, what do you mean she's safe? You didn't say anything about Brad being safe. Like you just, oh, she's safe. What about, I saw Brad in the bed, and I also saw Amy. Both kids were safe. You only said Amy was safe. At first, I was kind of like, yeah, that's weird. Until Brad came on and did an interview, and I don't remember this specific interview. I can look it up later on, but he does an interview and he speaks about this, and he said, well, what Netflix left out was that my dad actually went back to the disco around 3 a.m. Went to bed around midnight-ish, went back to the disco around 3 because he must have woken up and said like, hey, where are the kids? And just got a little nervous. So went back to the disco, saw Brad. Didn't see Amy, but Brad said, Amy's up there. Like there was a lounge that he was referencing. She's right up there. I can see her. She's up there. And Ron said, okay. And just kind of said, all right, good night. Just want to make sure you guys were good. Brad also mentioned that he was in a little dust up, as I mentioned before. He was dancing with a woman or a couple women, and one of them was married. Maybe he didn't know. I don't know. But a guy was like pretty much like, hey, get away from my wife. Like, don't dance with my wife. And he's like, hey, I'm so sorry. Just a little misunderstanding. That's why Brad as well brought up the fact that Ron came down, was because he's like, my dad knew I got into like a little, I don't know what he called it, maybe like a little confrontation or something. But he also, wanted to check on us. And then he went to bed. So now Brad mentions that they go back to the room around 3:30 in the morning, 3:35. He uses his key card to go in. Amy uses her key card about 5 minutes later. And they're on the balcony. They have a conversation. And Brad's like, hey, I'm going to go to bed. And Amy just stayed out on the balcony and like whatever. So she sits out on the balcony. So now Ron wakes up at 5:30 in the morning and just kind of like looks out like this and goes, oh, okay, she's safe. Again, I think it's semantics. Like he just said, oh, she's safe. That could also mean like, oh, she's good. That's just the word he chose to use at that moment. Like, again, I think it's just semantics. But that now makes sense to me and lines up why he would say that in the first place, is because she was there. And, he went to go look for her around 3 o'clock in the morning with Brad. He's like, oh, okay, they're good. But then woke up at 5:30, like, all right, I see Brad. All right, yep, Amy's here too, we're good. I just think it was just a dad being a dad. But 30 minutes later, well, actually, I think it was less than that. I think it was about 15 to 30 minutes later, he wakes up. And when he wakes up, she's no longer there. That also explains that sense of urgency, that I got to react now. I got to be quick now. Because if you think about it, this would make sense because, wait a minute, whoa, I just woke up 30 minutes ago and she was right there. Like right there. And now she's gone. This would make sense to me. This would make sense why the urgency was there. This would make sense why he seemed like really freaked out that she was no longer there. Because she was just there. Now, everything from, this point on is, we don't want to call it speculation, but I want to call it like, hey, it's based off statements that were made. Like, we don't have any proof of a lot of the stuff that's coming out from this moment on. We have some levels of verification and confirmation, but not much. But even up to this point, we don't really know. And that's just me being transparent. We don't really truly know. We're just basing it on what we feel makes sense based on the information we have. She's missing at this point. They don't know where she is. She's missing. So for her to go missing, when you just saw her 15 minutes prior, 20 minutes prior, I could understand the sense of urgency there. 100%. Now, we don't know where she is at this time. But it does make sense why Ron would wake up freaking out. She was just there. Now, remember, he also said, like, I felt like I blinked and I woke up and a little bit of time elapsed and now she was gone. So, you ever, like, wake up, like, 3 minutes before your alarm clock and you fall asleep and it's been, like, literally 3 minutes and you wake up, you're like, oh. Well, like, you close your eyes because you're starting to fall asleep and you felt like you just blinked and you fell asleep for 3.5 hours. Like, I think it's the same thing. Like, he just blinked and he just kind of woke up and he's like, wait a minute, she was just here. Like, just here. But again, it's semantics. So just know that as we continue to progress this story, a lot of this is based on the information that we're hearing from the Netflix documentary, the Hulu documentary, the Cruise Ship Killer documentary, some Unsolved Mysteries on America's Most Wanted, and then what Brad is putting out there now. We don't have much more than that, but we're going to focus on what we can only talk about. We don't want to throw out speculation. Well, this probably happened. All we have is one person telling the story right now. So we have to base what we have on that right now. I'm not saying that, that's the know all end all, but until we get some additional information, this is the information we have to roll with. Some people don't like it. And one last thing, I know a lot of people keep saying, oh, the family keeps changing their mind or their stories keep changing, timelines keep changing. To be clear, this was a very traumatic situation, and this was 27 years ago. So your memory is not going to be perfect. But the more you start to talk about it, more things come up. More things start to signal in your brain. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I just thought about this. It doesn't mean that there's a lie. It doesn't mean that people are making stuff up. It just means that new information is just starting to come out. New information is starting to click. Now, some of the information might not be important, but that's what we're here to do. We're here to talk about it, to figure it all out. The last thing we want to do is walk in the wrong direction, and in which case brings us further away from finding justice for Amy Bradley. So, guys, appreciate you guys listening, joining in. Have a good rest of your day, and we're going to do another one real soon. See ya.